Hey, my neon lights. 'Tis I, Midnight Neon, and I thought I would try and do a reaction video to Brew. I watch these guys pretty much regularly, but I mean, I actually made a video where I was kind of defending these guys because they, and I say they because Brew is not just one person; it is an entire team. I mean, they even showed pictures in one of their videos of them animating this. Why you? Hold on. There we go. They even showed pictures of them animating this little fella here. But I mean, he's a quite a well dressed, handsome little gentleman, with the exception of his messy hair. But they are, I mean, he's not, as far as I know of, he's not a VTuber. He's just a animated character that they have a voiceover actor do. Um, but like I said, these guys work hard, and I made a video about how people on the internet have been stealing their content, and I hate it because these guys make some really good content, and it's not fair that their stuff is being taken and someone else is profiting off of it. Because I mean, you gotta realize, to animate this little dude, to put all this stuff together, to make all this stuff, uh, it takes a lot of time, effort, and money, and you gotta pay these guys because they just, that's how they make their living. And I'm a little off center there. Anyway, that's how these guys make their living, and it kind of irks me when somebody does that because I don't make anything off my videos. Um, and I think I want to keep it that way, mainly because there's been a lot of issues, and really it's not anything I've done or they've done or anyone has done. It's just, it's crazy stuff going on in the world, and I just feel like people need to chill out a little bit. Yeah, you'll notice the screen just kind of enlarged. That was me setting the taskbar to disappear. So, but it's just it's not cool that these guys put in such great effort and such great work into their stories and videos for someone else to take it. So I thought I would give these guys a little shout out and to, basically tell Brew here just how much I appreciate the work that they all put into this. Um, these are their other, like, I guess they're on Instagram now. They didn't have one to begin with. I don't know about X. They may have had that one to begin with, and I don't know about Stacked. But I know, like, Spotify was not one of theirs. They're on there now, but they weren't to begin with. Some pretender had pretending to be them tried to make profit off of it. Um, I don't know what's going on between them and Spotify, whether they got that all cleared up or not. But it's a shame because it's really good content, by the way. Some of it can get kind of gross, some of it can get kind of creepy, some of it can get kind of weird, but it's all good because they put such effort into it. So we're gonna review. I was gonna watch the one on how Banksy got doxxed, but we're gonna actually not do that. This is their newest video. Ooh man, it's an hour and 26 minutes. These guys don't always do short videos. I mean, look at the times on them. This one's 45 minutes. That one's 54 minutes. This one's 32. I think it varies from case to case. But in this case, I'm gonna take the chance on a long one, and we're gonna watch Brew. So as I was saying before, I had to edit out my swear words. We're gonna watch Brew. And by the way, If you guys like their content that I'm about to show here, please, please do these guys a great big favor. Go to their channel on YouTube. Go to the stuff I just showed you. Give them likes, give them subscribes and comments, because the more you give them guys that particular stuff, the more they get recognition and the more pay they get for their work and effort. I'll go ahead and give the, well, no. Okay, so this apparently, oh nice. All right, hold on. Ooh, that's a lot of reading, but I'll do it for you guys. Okay, here we go. So this is some of the stuff that they didn't have time to go over in the video, obviously, because it is a pretty big video. All right, it says, question: why were hikers' skin discolored? Most of the skin was described as tan and brown, some blue and red. Later reports have changed to orange. Some thought this meant radiation or poisoning, but it's caused by being exposed to the elements, windburn, freezing temperatures, and likely extreme sunburn due to the high altitude. Question: why did the officials tell people to not drink from nearby wells after the incident? Answer: there is no documentation showing this. It's a myth. Question: why were animals found dead in the area? Answer: while tied to the above myth, there was fairly common epidemic of infectious disease killing cattle around around the time in the area, which some may have erroneously associated with the incident. My apologies. I know the word, but my tongue does not like it. Okay, now, what about the photo of the orb? Answer: on frame 34, the last frame of Krivonshin. I'm not gonna finish pronouncing it because I'm not. I don't want to be insulting. So, camera, because I'm sure they'll say the name anyways. Camera, there's a blurry white orb. This is just a photo taken by the lab technician so they could rewind the film. It's likely caused by the lens being partially covered, not focused or anything, or the lens being off the camera. Question: did Yuri Doroshenko... Ooh, I actually almost got that without any incident. Fall from the cedar tree? Answer: there's no evidence he had any falling injuries. Question: why was there gray liquid around Yuri's mouth? Answer: some suspect it's due to poisoning or a fall, but the liquid is commonly a sign of hypothermic lung edema, which can be caused by extreme hypothermia. In other words, his lungs froze over. Why? Okay, question: why were there clothes high up in the cedar tree branches? There were no clothes in the cedar tree. However, there were clothes around the cedar tree area, likely caused by switching out clothes or taking clothes off of the two bodies, as mentioned in the video. Ooh. Okay. Question: why were there clothes found at the den? Answer: many of those clothing items were found on top of the branches of the shelter floor, likely used as a seat while in the den. If you still have unanswered questions, feel free to ask them below. That's stuff down in here. Okay, so let's get to the video. Sorry if I butchered your stuff, guys. But like I said, my tongue don't always like the fancy names and words. All right, here we go. Oh, I better adjust my model because I never know where they're going to pop Brew up at. So I'm going to shrink down a bit. Well, technically zoom out. I don't really shrink, but... Okay. Alright, guys. Let's do this. Take it away, Brew and the crew.
This is our most ambitious video yet, taking several months to put together from start to finish. The Dyatlov Pass incident. 9 Russian hikers found dead under suspicious circumstances. A mystery many of you are probably familiar with. Yet, for over 60 years, it has evaded a widely accepted explanation. This is in part because nearly every time someone tries to explain it, they base their theories on common myths, inaccuracies, and misinterpretations of the facts. It's almost the rule, not the exception, for there to be mistakes or crucial details left out, and they often leave major questions unanswered. Whether it's radiation, burns, signs of torture, strange photographs, a missing tongue, missing eyes, a suspicious member of the group, government cover-up, or glowing lights in the sky. So, despite the expanse of media coverage out there, we felt the need to create a comprehensive video that does it right. In the month...
That's a lot of stuff for one mystery.
Our small team poured into this project, we did extensive research, looked at every angle we could, and explored the most often cited theories. Using science and original case documents, this video will attempt to clear up all the misconceptions and myths that have been told to you over the years, fill in the gaps, and give you a picture of what actually happened to the Dyatlov Pass hikers, to maybe, finally, put this mystery to rest, once and for all. Let's get into it. A telegram was supposed to arrive to the sports club on February 12, 1959, from the village of Visay to announce that their 2-week trek was complete. But those 9 hikers, mostly students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute or UPI, never sent one. Their leader, Igor Dyatlov, had even said to expect some delays, as was normal with expeditions this ambitious. So nobody was too alarmed at first, but with each passing day, the family's concerns deepened. To ease the growing anxiety, Lev Semyonovich Gordo, the head of the UPI sports club, which organized the trek and oversaw student expeditions, claimed Igor Dyatlov had sent a telegram stating the group was delayed. But this was a lie, in hope of calming the families. Gordo believed the group would turn up in a few days, no worse for wear. But the parents weren't convinced. Worry evolved into panic. They began pressing officials, eventually filing complaints with the local Communist Party. It worked, and with the threat of bad publicity, the university was finally forced to act. Colonel Georgy Semyonovich Ortyukov, head of the UPI's military department, was placed in charge of the search effort. On February 20th, 8 days after the telegram was supposed to be received, the first search party was put together. It was mostly students and teachers, friends of the missing, volunteers who knew how to read a compass and handled themselves in the wild of the Ural Mountains. Military personnel and state officials also joined in. They spent days trudging through whiteout conditions while making navigational errors and confusing some mountain peaks for others. Eventually, military units joined in, bringing airborne troops, helicopters, and rescue dogs under Captain Chernyshov and Lieutenant Potapov. Even hunters of the local indigenous people, the Mansi, joined the effort, gliding through snowdrifts on skis, navigating the terrain in ways the others simply couldn't. On February 25th, the search party finally located ski tracks that they believed were from Dyatlov's group. The very next day, they finally spotted something on the slope of Kholat Syakhl, their slashed tent, 1,000 feet below the Kholat Syakhl ridge. A quick note for transparency. There's conflicting data on the tent's exact location, given there was no GPS at the time. Using photos and topography data, 3 possible spots have been proposed. DyatlovPass.com cites an area where 3 independent Russian researchers agree the tent was found in 1959. In 2019, a Russian investigation identified a different location about 370 feet to the north, and a 2021 study gave yet another estimate roughly 720 feet northeast of that, both of which will be talked about later in the video. Since we can't verify the DyatlovPass.com researchers and the 2021 study's method is unclear, this video will use the 2019 investigation's location for our maps. Unfortunately, accuracy wasn't a focus for the initial investigation. The student members of the search group weren't experienced investigators, so they started to rummage through the items in the tent, making the tears bigger and overall compromising the integrity of a potential crime scene. They took a flask of alcohol and drank to their fallen friends, making sure to return it. They may have taken a chocolate bar to share amongst themselves, but that's unconfirmed. But we do know a few other items were taken back to the base camp and eventually handed over as evidence. Eventually, Vladimir Ivanovich Tempelov, the local prosecutor in charge of the case, took a look for himself. The tent was stretched on skis and poles stuck in the snow. Its entrance was facing south, and on this side the strings were intact, but the ropes of the tent on the north side were torn, and the whole second half of the tent was covered with snow. On top of the tent was a Chinese flashlight, which was closer to the entrance. Near the exit from the tent, I found a trace of urination. This trace was old. They found various items in the tent: 8 pairs of boots, 9 backpacks, some jackets, food, sliced lard with a knife near it, and a prepared cocoa drink, frozen. There was an ice axe in the snow near the tent. Some items were scattered outside: socks, a jacket, a second flashlight, and a broken piece of ski 65 feet from the tent. Further down, there were footprints. Below the tent, 50 to 60 meters from us on the slope, I found 8 sets of footprints of people that were carefully examined, but they were deformed due to winds and temperature fluctuations. These footprints were heading away from the tent, downhill, toward the tree line. Some prints were obviously barefoot. Others seemed to indicate they only had one boot on. And surprisingly, it didn't look messy, scattered, or spaced out as if running wild. They seemed hurried, yet careful, deliberate, and in single file. No signs of the bodies yet, so they set up camp in the trees to break up the wind from the mountain. The next day, they were told to find another campsite because more people would be coming in, including a canine unit. 2 of the students were out looking for a space to accommodate when they stumbled upon a tall cedar tree. There, they found a fire pit with charred cedar branches, partially covered in snow. The cedar tree's branches were broken all the way up to 16 feet above the ground. On the bark were pieces of human skin and blood, and nearby, a knee sticking out of the snow. Brushing the white powder away, it revealed 2 frozen bodies with little clothing on, side by side. These were the first hikers to be found: Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Alexeyevich Krivonischenko, just under a mile away from the tent. Yuri Doroshenko was 21 years old, a radio engineering student at Ural Polytechnic Institute. Big guy, strong, known for his fearless attitude. Once reportedly charged a bear with a geologist's hammer. Yes, that level of fearlessness. Someone you would want beside you in a crisis. He was also the tallest of the group, standing at around 5 feet 11 inches, with a sturdy build. But despite all of this, he was very reserved and quiet. He was wearing a torn undershirt, short-sleeved shirt, long underwear with shorts on top, torn socks, and no shoes. One sock on his left foot was burned around the toe. His hands were battered. He had burns on his right temple and hair. His ear, lips, and nose were covered in blood. His skin was discolored, and his fingers and toes looked frostbitten. Right beside Yuri Doroshenko was Georgy Krivonischenko, but he was often referred to by his friends as Yuri or other variations. However, to avoid confusion, we'll refer to him as Georgy. In some ways, the 23-year-old Georgy was the opposite of Yuri, since he was the shortest male in the group and the life of the party. He was the kind who cracked jokes and played mandolin. He kept morale high when the wind howled and the nights turned cruel. But behind the jokes was a sharp mind. He studied construction and hydraulics. He was close with Dyatlov and signed on to the expedition without hesitation, not for glory, just for the love of the challenge. He was found dead, wearing a checkered shirt, an undershirt, underpants, trunks, and only one sock. They noticed abrasions on his forehead and chest, scratches up and down his arms, burns on his hands and left pant leg. But there was one particularly disturbing detail. Some of the skin from his own hand was found inside his mouth. The search continued. Some of the Mansi men found another body, about 1,000 feet away from the cedar tree, in the direction of the tent, where the trees were sparse. They found group leader Igor Dyatlov. Igor was a 23-year-old radio engineering student. Smart guy, very methodical. He both built a portable stove and modified the tent that they used on the trip. He even built radios in his spare time. But Igor wasn't just a smart guy with a soldering iron. He was also calm under pressure. disciplined, and had already racked up serious mileage in the wild. He was the type of man who could probably navigate a snowstorm using mathematics and sheer willpower, which is why he was the leader of the group, and why his family name will forever be linked to this tragic and mysterious event. They found him lying flat on his back in the snow, head towards the tent, arms curled tight to his chest, fists clenched like he died mid-brace. He wore an unbuttoned fur vest, layered over a sweater and a long-sleeved shirt, ski pants over his trousers, but no coat, no boots, just a wool sock on one foot, a cotton one on the other. He had on him a pocket knife, a notebook, rope, a ski mask, and some cloves of garlic. Why garlic? It likely wasn't for supernatural reasons, but maybe medicinal, since garlic was sometimes referred to as Russian penicillin. They immediately noticed his face was covered in frostbite, but there were scratches everywhere, on his face, hands, legs. His lips were covered in blood. He was also missing a tooth, but the gums looked healed over. The search continued on that day. Lieutenant Nikolai Mosiev, with his canine dog Alma, stopped at a patch of snow. Alma started pacing.
What in God's name? I know they're going to tell us what happened, but God, what in the world happened to these guys?
And then digging, uncovering the fourth hiker, Zinaida Kolmogorova. She was found near Igor, also facing the direction of the tent, about 2,000 feet from the cedar tree. She was 22 years old, sharp, strong, experienced. She'd already completed multiple Category 2 expeditions, 2 of which she had led, and was on her way to earning her certification for a Grade 3, the highest level available at the time. On one expedition, she was bitten by a viper. Despite the pain, she refused to give others the burden of carrying her packs and ignored help. But what made Xena stand out wasn't just her resilience, it was her presence. She had a quiet strength, the kind that held groups together, especially when the cold set in and tempers ran hot. She didn't force positivity, she offered it when it was needed most, a warm spirit in an unforgiving landscape. She was found face down, both of her legs were half bent. Xena was found better dressed than most of the others. A ski jacket with shirt, ski pants with leggings, woolen socks but no boots. On her was 5 rubles and a military-style protective cloth mask. Her face was bloodied, with abrasions on her face and hands. Her knuckles showed signs of impact, and the right side of her body had a significant abrasion too, with blood present. Only 4 of the 9 bodies had been found, but the sun was setting, and the searchers had to stop and set up camp. But as time passed, the deep snow and winds proved too challenging for the dogs to sniff out the bodies, so they needed to resort to probing with metal rods, sticking them into the snow to feel for a buried hiker. 4 days later, on March 2nd, one group found the storage site of the hikers, a cache set up to lighten their load, with extra supplies and gear for the trip back. The next day, the 4 recovered bodies were sent for autopsy. Still no signs of the other 5. The probing continued. 3 days later, on March 5th, between where Igor and Zinaida had been recovered, they found another body buried beneath the snow. Again, head facing towards the tent, face down. It was Rustium Slobodin. Rustium was a 23-year-old, quiet, disciplined radio engineering student with a sharp mind and methodical to a fault. A long-distance runner with a habit of planning everything down to the last detail. He wasn't the loudest in the group, but when it came to endurance, few matched him. His right leg was pulled beneath him, with his right fist to his leg. The snow was melted beneath him, forming an icy bed, indicating he was still warm when he fell. He was found with 1 boot missing. He wore several layers of clothing, including a sweater, ski pants, and fleece-lined underwear. Items found on him included a pocket knife, a few rubles, a pencil, matchbox and comb, and some paper. His watch had stopped at 8:45. There were abrasions on his forehead, nose, hands, and legs. His right temple showed swelling, and there was dried blood near his nose. Both hands and feet showed signs of frostbite. There was a small hemorrhage on the right side of his head. After the first 5 bodies were recovered, the momentum for the search slowed. Students had to get back to classes. Storms and deep snow hindered everything. Some suggested they wait until the snow melted, but eventually the tired and demoralized searchers were replaced with new teams. Days went by, then weeks. Their efforts provided nothing. Then, in late April, with spring beginning to melt away the blanket of snow, a clue was found. On May 5th, just over 2 months after the search party first found the camp, a Muncie hunter came across signs of a collapsed snow shelter in a ravine near the cedar tree where the bodies of Yuri and Georgi were discovered. He immediately reported it to the authorities. On May 6th, Prosecutor Tempelov arrived at the ravine to oversee the initial investigation. 14 fir tree tops and a single birch tree top lying across the snow were the only signs of a possible shelter. If there was originally more, it had melted away. Just down the ravine, with the help of a probe, 4 bodies were found buried under 13 feet of snow. The bodies were identified as the last 4 members of the Dyatlov group: Ludmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thibio-Brignol, and Alexander Kolevatov. These 4 weren't just frozen, they were mangled. Ludmila Dubinina was the youngest in the group, yet she was known to be among the toughest. A civil engineering student that was sharp, driven, and stubborn in the best way. On a past hike, she took a bullet to the leg by accident and still finished the trek without complaint. She was found in the stream, face first, dressed in layers of torn shirts, 2 sweaters, and even a sleeve wrapped around 1 foot. Her pants had been ripped apart at the waist and thighs. Strangely, some clothing found on her had burn marks, including her trousers. The damage to her body was worse. It was locked in a strange, twisted position, with arms bent unnaturally, mouth slightly frozen open. Her torso had visibly sunken inward, misshapen beneath layers of damp clothing. The surrounding snow bore no signs of a struggle, but something had crushed her from the outside in. And then there were the facial injuries. Her eyes were missing, the tongue was gone, down to the base. Soft tissue around the mouth had been stripped away, and her nose was flattened. The skin on her hands and feet had begun peeling. Some of her fingernails were also gone. However she had gone, it didn't look peaceful. Then there was 23-year-old Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, who was found closest to Ludmila. With his French-Russian background and easy charm, he stood out among the group, but he had a rough life. His father was imprisoned as part of the Stalinist purge and died in a labor camp, while his brother died in World War II. But despite all of that, Nikolai was known for being reliable and cheerful and had been on several previous expeditions with Igor. Nikolai's body was found clothed in layers of military-grade winter gear, a green wool cap with 3 holes torn in front, and a fur-lined khaki hat. Underneath, he wore hand-knitted wool socks, some of which had slipped off and crumpled into the soles of his gray felt boots. He had layers underneath, as well as a fur-lined jacket. 2 watches clung to his left wrist, one frozen at 8:14:24, the other at 8:39. In his pockets were gloves, some coins, 2 folded slips of paper, and a comb. He had sunken eyes, macerated skin on the fingers and toes. His nails had also begun to lift, and his skin was discolored. Next to Nikolai was Semyon Zolotaryov. At 38, he was more than a decade older than the rest of the group, and came from a different world entirely. A decorated World War II veteran, he had fought in some of the most brutal Soviet campaigns and lived through Stalin's purges, a man shaped by conflict. By 1959, he was a certified ski instructor working with a tourism organization in the Caucasus region, and on paper, he had the credentials for the expedition, but he was the odd one out for several reasons. Unlike the others, Semyon looked ready to survive. 2 hats, a scarf, layered sweaters, a fur-lined coat, handmade boots, and a compass in his pocket, along with coins and even a newspaper scrap. Plus, he had a camera around his neck. And then there was a notebook. Vladimir Ashkenazy, one of the searchers, said Soviet Colonel Georgy Ortyakov took one look at it and muttered, "He's written nothing." Then he pocketed it. Just like that, the notebook was never seen again. Semyon also had a gash on his head, clean to the bone, and the skin around his left eye was peeled away. His eye.
He pocketed that book without showing it to the other people who were searching. He pocketed it because there was something in there he knew.
His were missing, just like Ludmila. His skin showed discoloration, like the others. Alexander Kolevatov, the furthest from Ludmila, was found holding Semyon.
What he might have found on there was probably dangerous enough that he probably told the other people that there was nothing on it. So in other words, they know nothing. You know, they couldn't say anything. You know, it's God only knows what was in that book.
Either placed that way, or they were huddled together for warmth. He was 24 and studied nuclear physics. He worked at a classified research lab in Moscow. the kind of Cold War facility where secrecy wasn't optional but mandatory.
That could have been what was in the book.
Calm, focused, and notoriously private, Alexander didn't scare easy. His body was found wearing several layers of clothing, 2 sweaters, a checkered shirt, ski pants, and a tattered ski jacket, one sleeve burned, the other elbow torn. His feet were wrapped in mismatched socks, some of them singed. In his pocket, a key which was likely for the group's storage back at the university, 2 packages of pills, codeine and sodium bicarbonate, as well as paper and a safety pin.
Codeine's often used in painkillers.
His face lacked soft tissue around his eyes, and his skull was exposed, but there was no immediate sign of wounds. Laying it all out, we start to see a possible picture, but a vague one at that. The tent was ripped, gear still there. They mostly fled without shoes, without supplies, and they split into 3 groups, 2 around.
That doesn't make sense to me. Why would you leave all of your shoes behind? I don't get it. Something went horribly wrong.
The fire, 3 heading back towards the tent, and 4 further into the forest to build a shelter. Many had strange wounds. It left a lot of questions for the investigators, and many theories were starting to percolate, which is why they needed to find out what the autopsies had revealed. But more curiously, some of their organs and clothes were sent for radiological tests. But before we get into all of that, to investigate this properly, we should first determine why they were out there in the first place, and see if it reveals any clues. It was Igor Dyatlov who organized this trip in early 1959. This was an expedition to earn their Grade 3 hiking certification, which was the highest at the time in the Soviet Union. Igor picked a solid team with the following qualities: smart, strong, and experienced. Most of them were fellow students, friends, basically people he trusted and who trusted him. 11 was the number of the group for the initial planned expedition, 9 men and 2 women. Originally, they were all students or grads from the Ural Polytechnical Institute in Sverdlovsk, engineers, radio technicians, physics majors, but 2 of the men dropped out, leaving them with only 9. That's when Semyon Zolotaryov came into the picture. As a gruff, tattooed World War II veteran, 38 years old and definitely the odd man out, he joined the Dyatlov group at the very last minute. None of them really knew him that well, and he wasn't a graduate of UPI. Semyon had originally planned to head north with another group led by student hiker Sergei Sogrin. It was also to earn his Grade 3 hiking certification. But this route was a tougher, longer route into the subpolar Urals, so when the group's timetable didn't match his, Sogrin introduced him to Igor instead. At least, that's the story. As for the group's goal of this challenging endeavor, a 190-mile ski trek through the northern Urals, a long mountain range that runs mostly through Russia. It was a remote, frozen, and dangerous mission. To qualify for Grade 3, hikers had to demonstrate advanced survival skills, navigation, and endurance through extremely difficult conditions. The route had to be approved by the local hiking committee. Their destination was Mount Otorten, a peak whose name was often mistranslated to "Don't Go There" by modern Western books, blogs, and documentaries, all to add to the ominous mystery of this tragedy. In truth, Mount Otorten, in the local Mansi language, actually translates to the Windy Mountain. They departed from Sverdlovsk by train on January.
I hate it when people purposely mistranslate language, because that just creates more barriers and mistrust. It's like the whole thing with the Japanese translations. I wish whoever translates that stuff would leave the translations alone. I mean, if you're going to translate it to exactly what they actually say. I forget what Rev calls them, but I don't care. It's just something that shouldn't be done. It should, if you're going to translate someone else's language, translate it to the meaning that they meant. That's all I'm saying.
23rd, 1959, and reached Serov the next day. At the train station, Georgi, the life of the party, started to sing while panhandling to get some money for candy. The police detained him, but luckily only gave him a warning. Not long after, on the train, a drunk accused them of stealing. The police were called again, but nothing came of it. It's 2 small moments, often overlooked, but now, in hindsight, it feels like the first ripples of a disaster. They made their way to Ivdiel, then Visay, took a truck to a logging settlement, and then went by skis in a horse-drawn sled for their equipment to an abandoned geological site with around 25 houses. There, they rested, cooked, repacked, tried to enjoy the last time they would have 4 walls and a roof, and some semblance of comfort. By January 28th, Yuri Yudin had to turn back due to health concerns. A lifetime of joint pain and sciatica, aggravated by the cold and the weight of his pack, forced a quiet reckoning. But what looked like a disheartening setback for Yuri at the time turned out to be a blessing in disguise.
No
Yudin would
kidding.
become the only survivor of the Dyatlov group, but he would forever live with survivor's guilt. After Yuri Yudin left, that's when the expedition truly began. They pressed on into the forested foothills. On January 29th, at 8 degrees Fahrenheit, the weather was mild, well, relatively at least. They skied up to Ospia River, following a Mansi trail to the Ural Ridge, where they set up camp. The group was in good spirits. January 30th, they continued following the Mansi path, marked by symbols on the trees, up the Ospia River. It was a bit colder, 1 degree Fahrenheit. The morale was generally good, but there was a fight about who would sew some holes in the tent. January 31st, it was windy, going down as far as -11 degrees Fahrenheit. They left the Ospia Valley, going upwards, slightly off the planned route. They were starting to feel exhausted. They spent the night at the edge of the forest and enjoyed a meal. Dinner's in the tent, nice and warm. Can't imagine such comfort on the ridge, with howling wind outside, hundreds of kilometers away from human settlements. Igor Dyatlov. Igor seemed to know that the worst was yet to come, but unfortunately, he didn't know how terrible it would truly be. February 1st, the weather was foul. Winds as high as 40 miles per hour, temperatures as low as -2 degrees Fahrenheit, and visibility was minimal due to blowing snow. They were still 6 miles from their destination, Mount Otorten. While there was a tree line below them in the distance, Igor didn't want to lose the altitude they had gained. So despite the wind, they decided to set up camp on Mount Kolatsiakal, which is Mansi for Dead Mountain. They cut a wind barrier into the snow and set up their tent.
Yeah, that's not ominous at all. Dead Mountain. Ugh.
Luckily, their spirits were high. They even took the time to write a satirical leaflet called The Evening Otorten. Then, as temperatures plunged to -23 degrees Fahrenheit overnight, something horrific happened that resulted in all 9 of their deaths. Now that we know why they went on the hike, let's get into the nitty-gritty of what the autopsies revealed. In some ways, it answered some questions, but it also raised more disturbing ones. The first 5 bodies found, Yuri, Georgi, Igor, Zinaida, and Rustium, were all determined to have died from exposure to low temperatures or freezing. The forensic medical expert in charge of all the autopsies, Dr. Vozrozdenyi, noted that many of their external injuries, like cuts, abrasions, and bruises, were considered minor and wouldn't have been fatal. For example, some of Yuri's hair and a sock were burnt, along with various abrasions, superficial skin wounds caused by friction. Georgi had 2nd and 3rd degree burns, especially a big one on his left shin, and part of his nose was missing, exposing cartilage. Igor showed scratches and abrasions on his face and hands, and Zinaida had abrasions on her face and a more significant one on her lower back. Even Rustium, despite a crack in his skull, ultimately froze to death. These lesser injuries were thought to be from falls or bumping into things like rocks and ice, occurring both before and after they died. Both Yuri and Georgi had burns, possibly from tending to the fire built next to the cedar tree. Yuri also had a bite on his finger and some skin in his mouth, suggesting the bite was self-inflicted, potentially in an attempt to stay awake. Now, the remaining 4 individuals, Ludmila, Semyon, Nikolai, and Alexander, were found later, buried under deep snow in a ravine. Alexander was concluded to have died from low temperature exposure, similar to the first group, but for the other 3, their injuries painted a very different picture. Ludmila, Semyon, and Nikolai all died from severe physical traumas, indicating a violent cause of death. Ludmila had extensive bilateral rib fractures, meaning multiple ribs on both sides of her chest were broken, alongside massive bleeding into her heart and thoracic cavity. Strangely, she was also found missing her tongue and some soft tissue around her eyes and upper lip, with a mucosal mass in her stomach. Semyon suffered from multiple broken ribs on his right side, which were fatal. Nikolai had a significant crushed fracture to the base and top of his skull, with a lot of bleeding under his brain membranes. Dr. Vozrozdenyi stated that the force required to inflict such damage would have been extremely high, even comparing it to a car crash. Despite these internal crushing injuries, it's worth noting that these specific severe traumas didn't have corresponding external open wounds. They were internal. All 4 bodies also showed signs of decomposition from being in water as the snow melted. Furthermore, autopsy reports also provided that there were no drugs in their systems, no signs of intoxication. This automatically puts to rest any theories about them being on a substance of some sort, running into the night in a wild delusional frenzy. Due to some strange discolorations in the clothing and the heightened tensions of the Cold War, there were suspicions of possible military involvement or contamination, either chemical or radioactive, and so some organs and clothing from the final 4 were sent for radiological testing. The organs came out normal, but the clothing, not so much. A brown sweater that Ludmila was wearing showed 9,900 counts per minute on a 150 centimeter squared area, while a section of pants and a belt worn by Alexander registered 5,000 CPM and 5,600 CPM. Radiation was also found on Nikolai, 600 CPMs, and Semyon at around 2,000 CPM. Not deadly, but definitely not natural. To put it in perspective, normal background radiation in their setup was around 90 to 100 CPM. It's also important to note that these items were in flowing, melt water for about 15 days, which likely reduced the contamination, so it may have been much more on the night of. Most importantly, this was beta radiation, a type of ionizing radiation that doesn't penetrate as far as gamma and can be stopped by materials like clothes. The conclusion was that the clothes were contaminated by some sort of radioactive dust. However, for whatever reason, the other 5 hikers weren't tested for radiation, so it's impossible to tell if they had any of this supposed dust or not as well. Putting this all together, the slashed tent, the footprints, finding 2 at the tree, 3 on their way to the tent.
Yeah, but where would they have gotten exposed to radiation at? And besides the radiation, it will affect your mind, but I'm not sure to what degree. How much you have to be exposed before it starts to affect your brain. I mean, wow.
4 near a hastily built den and radioactive dust. It painted a confusing picture. Something clearly sent them out of the tent in a hurried, organized fashion. Then, for some reason, they separated. But the question remained, what made them leave in the first place? They all had cameras and diaries, but unfortunately, none of them revealed anything useful to the investigation. Initially, the investigation leaned towards an avalanche. However, the rescuers who stood at the site, the first to make the grim discovery, saw the way the tent lay half buried. They measured the angle of the slope and couldn't find clear signs of an avalanche.
No, if it was an avalanche, they wouldn't have found that tent at all. Not until the snow melted.
Avalanches typically happen on slopes between 30 degrees and 45 degrees. Once you're past 30 degrees, snow layers can become unstable enough to shear and slide. The sweet spot, if you can call it that, is around 38 degrees, where avalanches are most common. In the Dyatlov case, the official investigation recorded the slope where the tent was pitched at about 30 degrees, but photographic evidence shows that it was actually sitting closer to 15 degrees. Furthermore, there was no avalanche path as reported by the first rescuers to arrive in the area. There were no telltale slide marks, trail of debris, or a heap of snow suggesting a violent collapse from above. When searchers found the tent, it was still standing. Tilted, yes, but intact in places. If an avalanche had thundered through with enough force to send 9 seasoned hikers fleeing barefoot into the dark, it should have torn through everything. But the scene told a different story. With that theory quickly dismissed by investigators, they went over the next significant clue that they had, the slashes on the tent. Some investigators suspected an attack, which would also explain some of the injuries. Even though they helped with the search, the Mansi were among the first to be questioned. Perhaps the Dyatlov group had unknowingly wandered into sacred territory and paid the price. Several Mansi locals were questioned, some detained for days. Soviet authorities were under pressure to find someone to blame, and early on, murder was absolutely on the table. The hikers ended up dead in the middle of nowhere? To the KGB and regional prosecutors, it screamed foul play, and the indigenous Mansi, isolated and misunderstood by much of Soviet society, became easy suspects. But here's what the investigation actually found. The Mansi weren't known for violence. Locals described them as peaceful, even helpful to outsiders. There were no reports of previous conflict with hikers. None. And more importantly, the Mansi had no motive. Their testimonies confirmed they were aware of the group's route and had no problem with it. In fact, one of the so-called sacred sites, like Otorten, wasn't even central to Mansi spiritual tradition, despite what some theorists later claimed. There was no motive, and the Mansi were released. There were more outlandish suspicions that led to the theory of a Yeti attack. The Yeti, or snowman.
The Yeti. I have yet to see proof of a real Yeti. This is the same thing as like Bigfoot. I've not seen any real proof of that yet. I mean, there's been theories, heck, they've even made movies, both creatures of both the Yeti and Bigfoot, so who knows? Oh my goodness.
Is a legendary creature said to inhabit remote mountainous regions of Siberia and the Himalayas. It's often depicted as a massive ape-like being with white fur, much like the Bigfoot sightings we hear about in North America. And in the case of Dyatlov Pass, some have suggested that the hikers were attacked by this mythical creature during their trek. What could have caused people to look towards this outlandish explanation? Well, there was this picture recovered from Nikolai's camera. Similar to most alleged.
It's super grainy and undefined, but that's definitely a man, not a monster.
Photos of the Yeti or its cousin Bigfoot, it was blurry. A shadowy figure caught mid-step among the trees. And it might explain the injuries. Crushed ribs, shattered skulls, tongues missing, eyes gone, it builds a picture. The hikers startled in their sleep, running half-dressed into the dark, hunted by something they couldn't fight. But that infamous photo? Look one frame earlier on the same camera roll, and it shows a group member wearing a similar outfit. Same contrast between jacket and pants, same silhouette. The creature looks more like a friend caught at a distance than a beast of legend. Okay, so maybe Yeti is a bit too preposterous, but let's lean more towards claws than conspiracy. A bear maybe, wolves, or a wolverine slashing into the tent.
I don't know about the bear. I mean, after all, that one guy was brave enough to take that bear on with nothing more than a hammer, so... Anyway.
Something territorial, fast, and mean enough to send even seasoned hikers into a blind panic. These animals are native to the Urals, and may have slashed into the tent, sending them in a frenzy, where they were chased down and killed. But the problem with all of these attack theories is that we know they didn't run away. They were hurried, perhaps, but the footprints showed a bit of organization, some level of calm, and many of them died of hypothermia, not injuries. On top of that, maybe the slashes on the tent were being looked at all wrong. The investigation changed when a seamstress came to mend one of the investigators' uniforms at the local police station in Ivdel. There, the Dyatlov expedition tent was hung up for close examination. The seamstress took a look at the tent, ran her hand along one of the slashes, and noted what the investigators had not. The cuts were made from the inside, not from the outside. A forensic lab in Sverdlovsk, led by Genrietta Cherkina, confirmed it formally after analyzing the fabric. Only after that did investigators consider that the hike...
So this whole mess started from inside the tent. That's not good. That is not good at all.
Hikers had slashed their own shelter before stepping into the storm, which further muddled the case rather than providing answers. That single moment, the hands-on insight from a seamstress changed the direction of the entire investigation, because the chances that this was an attack became far less likely, unless the hikers cut themselves out of the tent to escape an attack, which seemed more far-fetched. Now that it was proven that the tent was slashed open from within, investigators tried to understand why all of the hikers fled barefoot, half-dressed, into the pitch-black cold. Whatever happened, it struck fast and left the hikers in a situation wherein they could not afford to stay and think about what to do next. But conflict wasn't entirely off the table. Internal conflict was also looked at as a possibility. Could a fight among the group have gotten out of hand? The hikers were young, tight-knit, and had spent weeks in isolation, buried under routine and rising tension. Diaries recovered from the expedition hinted at frictions. One intrigue noted that Georgi had taken issue with sleeping arrangements. Nobody wants to sleep by the stove. We agree that Georgi will sleep there. Georgi could not stand the heat and, after lying down for 1 to 2 minutes, got up and went to the second section cursing and accusing us of treason. After that, they kept arguing about something for a long time, but in the end, everything was quiet. Then there were the rumors about a love triangle. Some said Zina Kolmogorova and Yuri Doroshenko had a history. Others believed Rustem Slobodin had feelings for her. A subtle shift in affection, a perceived betrayal. It wouldn't take much. One wrong word, one flare of jealousy. So maybe a fight broke out inside the tent, that it spiraled out of control. Someone ran in, and others chased. That was when panic took over. The result, chaos in the cold darkness. However, these are mere speculations, as no mention of any romantic feelings towards any of the other hikers can be found in Zina's diaries and journals. As for Georgi's outburst, it is unclear whether this was a serious one or merely out of jest. Georgi is known to be quite lighthearted, and not one to be easily swayed towards anger or even violence. Take a closer look at the wording. Accusing us of treason. It sounds more like a lighthearted jab than the spark of a serious conflict. In the end, there's no real proof of this, only speculation, and it hardly explains why they never.
They're a group of scientists and civilians. There wouldn't be any call for treason unless they were military or government officials.
Returned to the tent. But what about that stove in their tent? Investigators began to wonder, was it an accidental fire from the inside? Zina's diary revealed a small accident on the previous night, with little details. Burned mittens too, and Georgi's quilted jacket. He cursed a lot. And there were 2 pictures from Georgi's camera, where Rustem, for laughs, wore this quilted jacket. The burns looked to be significant. Were they wet and put close to the fire and caught sparks? Or was it caused by stray sparks from the stove in the tent? The collapsible stove, made by Igor Dyatlov, wasn't your typical camp stove. It was compact, efficient, and welded from sheet metal, and it was designed to be disassembled. A pipe vented smoke through a hole in the canvas. Simple, but clever. Just enough to keep the cold from sinking into the bone, and have a few warm meals. Some have suggested that it could have malfunctioned, sending sparks or causing smoke to fill the tent and forcing the group to flee. It would also explain.
I'll say I've never seen a portable stove or wood fire heater like that suspended in the air like that. Most people would have probably dug the snow out and put it directly on the ground, or made some sort of like stone platform to put it on.
Some of the burns on the hikers. But before we jump to conclusions, let's dig deeper. There were no burns on the tent, not a single scorch mark. There's also
no burns in the tent. Well, perhaps it wasn't a fire.
So some conflicting info out there. Some say the stove was packed away, while others swear it was full of wood. But the official documents are clear about this. The stove was found in its case. It wasn't set up and wasn't used, and the chimney pipes were inside. In addition, rescuers noted finding food in the tent, all of it.
That doesn't make sense. If you're in a cold environment, you're going to set up some form of heat.
Uncooked. And when investigators arrived, they found the tent's stovepipe flap completely shut. Given the strong winds of the mountain and chance of smoke being blown back into the tent, this made perfect sense. And like that, the flames of this theory were snuffed. With the investigation almost dead in the water and people looking for answers, something unexpected gave credence to new wild theories, which could help explain the injuries and even the radiation. It was reported.
It's why often old houses that have like cook stoves or fireplaces, they're usually located in the center of the house so that the chimney goes straight up out the top. And then that way, if the wind blows in one direction or the other, it doesn't blow back into the house. It's carried away. Now, if you put a chimney on the side of the house rather than straight up out the top, the wind can blow it back in. So,
Reports of lights in the sky. Soldiers stationed nearby, hikers on distant slopes, and even members of the Mansi community spoke of glowing orbs in the sky around the time of the search. Bright, spherical, and silent, drifting overhead in the night sky. One sighting came on February 17th, A military serviceman, A. Savkin, on his morning watch, saw a ball of bright white light at around 6:40 a.m. moving north, hovering for 8 to 10 minutes, just days after the group was believed to have died.
That was
Another
too
witness
bright.
report stated that at 6:50 that morning, meteorologists
Actually,
took a
brighter
ride,
than
saw
my
what she
ring light.
described as a moving star with a tail. Then it expanded, turned into a large ball faintly covered in haze. By 7:05, it had faded from view. No sound or impact, it just vanished. Another report followed on March 31st during the ongoing search operations. Rescuers said they saw orange lights hanging over Kholat Syakhl, the very mountain where the bodies had been recovered. Reports described a bright ring-shaped light moving above Kholat Syakhl. Inside that ring, a small point of light appeared, like a star, then broke off and dropped behind a nearby ridge. Lead investigator Lev Ivanov didn't dismiss them. He logged the witness statements, and later, when the case had already been sealed, he said, "I suspected at the time, and am almost sure now, that these bright flying spheres had a direct connection to the group's death." It was a bold thing to admit, especially in 1959 Soviet Union, where official
Yeah, no
narratives
kidding.
were tightly controlled. He claimed he had been pressured to abandon any mention of the lights and to replace them with a safer explanation, one that didn't point up. And what did he think they were? He had a few theories, but one of them was UFOs, which most jump to thinking it means aliens. There is enough documentation to warrant a look into this, at the very least, and see if we can't come to our own conclusion. All these reports of orbs are from after the incident, but we do have one from the night of. G. Atamanaki, a student hiker from the Pedagogical Institute, reported seeing a luminous orb over Mount Otorten on the night of February 1st. It's not the same mountain, it's where they were trying to reach, but it was close enough to raise a few eyebrows. Supporters of the UFO theory point to the unusual injuries on some of the bodies, like the massive internal trauma without external wounds, and the hikers fleeing their tent in such a panic, half-dressed in freezing weather. The idea is that they were either scared off by a sudden aerial phenomenon, or attacked by little green men armed with phasers, which UFO enthusiasts connect to the radiation found on the hikers. Combine that with the lights in the
Nice Star Trek reference, fellas.
sky, and you've got yourself a recipe for alien conspiracy. But there is possible evidence of some sort of energy weapon being fired, at least according to one report. Near the cedar tree, investigators noted unusual marks on the trunks of a few young pines. However, in contradiction to some secondhand interpretations of the original reports, these weren't blast-scorched or charred black, but they were clearly burned. Prosecutor Lev Ivanov in 1990, decades after the case had gone cold, gave a rare public account of what he saw during the May 1959 return to Dyatlov Pass. He described burn marks on a few young trees, singed bark, surface-level damage. He noted the burns were not in concentric form, which he took to mean they weren't caused by a normal explosion. He speculated a heat ray or an unknown energy source. That theory caught on, especially when paired with the radiation found on the hikers' clothes. But when the site was examined more closely, the picture changed. L.N. Lukin, one of the investigators who returned to the area with E.P. Maslenikov in May 1959, later clarified what they actually saw. He acknowledged the same burn marks, but there's no record of him describing anything unusual, and his exact words were singed, which is a few notches down from burned, and it was all in the same area where the fire was built. So while Ivanov leaned into the extraordinary, Lukin stayed grounded. And that contrast matters because it shows how the same evidence can lead two people down two different paths. For that reason alone, it's hard to take the alien theory seriously, especially with no other evidence to back it up. Let's bring things down to reality. At first glance, this next theory has all the makings of a wild conspiracy, possibly supernatural in origin. It sounds like the Yeti of the meteorological world, but it's well documented. It's called ball lightning. People have been reporting it for centuries. From sailors, soldiers, and even Nikola Tesla tried to recreate it. Photos and videos of it are rare and sometimes questionable, just like that blurry Yeti photo. However, more and more footage of this rare phenomenon are showing up. On July 2nd, 2025, a couple from Alberta, Canada, Ed and Melinda Party, saw a vicious lightning strike in the distance from their home and pulled out their phone when the lightning seemed to stay there in orb form. They didn't know what it was, thinking it was a ball of fire at first. It hovered just...
That was not a flattering picture of those people. I mean, they were... Never mind. There was nothing wrong with them. It's just the angle was off.
Above the ground, moving with the wind before dissipating. Scientists still don't know what causes it, other than an intense lightning strike, but they have managed to recreate them in labs with microwaves. But understanding of this phenomenon is still in its infancy. However, we can find more videos around the internet of supposed balls of lightning, some more believable than others. This theory was explored in depth in the book The Dyatlov Pass Mystery, Not a Cold Case by Henning Kirsten. He proposes that a lightning ball shining its intense light through the canvas might have been enough to scare our hikers. Based on a research paper from 2016, Tilted Relativistic Microwave Theory of Ball Lightning, this phenomenon produces intense heat and sounds like hissing, buzzing, or clicking, a recipe.
Okay, that might explain the burns in injuries like that, but that doesn't explain the broken bones and severe trauma and wounds. I don't know what happened, but
Cause panic for anyone, especially in the middle of nowhere on the side of a mountain in absolute darkness. Maybe even the radiation, not enough to be lethal but still worrying, could be explained by the plasma. Kirsten doesn't claim this as fact. He offers it as a possibility, one grounded in evidence, even if it leans on a remarkable string of coincidences. Just one rare phenomenon, and 9 people in the worst possible place to see it. This theory, while more grounded in science, has more holes than a slice of Swiss cheese. First problem, ball lightning usually needs thunderstorms, electrical activity in the atmosphere. And on the night of February 1st, 1959, the weather was cold, snowy, and completely lacking in thunderstorms. Second, allegedly, no one's ever been struck by ball lightning and come out looking like they lost a fight with a freight train. The injuries tied to this ultra-rare phenomenon, or lightning in general, it's typically just burns, not shattered ribs or broken skulls. Third, the radiation recorded was beta radiation. High-energy lightning may produce X-ray and gamma radiation, but no beta dust that would sit on clothes for days or weeks. Also, lightning balls are believed to be of low-energy plasma, less likely to produce dangerous radiation. But there's one more explanation for the lights in the sky, and that's weapons testing. Because if folklore and freak weather don't scare you, the Soviet military just might. The theory goes like this. The Dyatlov group unknowingly wandered into the middle of a classified weapons test. Maybe it was chemical weapons, maybe parachute mines, maybe something nuclear and experimental that was never meant to be seen. The most widely discussed version suggests their route cut through zones reportedly used for secret military tests, specifically parachute mines, which detonate midair and send out devastating shockwaves. Not lethal from a distance, but powerful enough to crush bone without leaving a scratch, which could explain the injuries. So, going by this theory, on the evening of February 1st, the group was startled awake by an explosion. In a state of panic, they slashed their tent from the inside and fled into the freezing night, inadequately dressed. It is likely the group believed they were escaping ongoing detonations, or maybe the fear of further blasts. And maybe they were right, and they were hit by a few more. And to be fair, the theory has some pretty convincing talking points. There are the injuries. Several hikers suffered brutal internal trauma, which could be caused by the pressure wave of an explosion. But these injuries could also have been caused by heavy debris. Another theory is that a shockwave of this weapon testing may have rippled through the trees, upending a tree, causing it to crash down on the unsuspecting hikers. In the book 1079, The Overwhelming Force of Dyatlov Pass by Igor Pavlov and Teodor Hadziiska, they floated the falling tree theory and backed it up with real-world cases. They point to a few events of trees falling on people, and the injuries seem to match the internal injuries of the hikers. 1079 argues the hikers didn't camp on the open slope at all. They believed the real site was at the forest's edge, beneath tree cover, far from the wind-exposed ridge where the tent was found. And they make a point. No seasoned mountaineer would want to pitch camp on the side of a mountain when they had tree cover nearby to break the wind. Their take? A partial collapse, maybe even a full tree fall, slammed into the tent. In addition, the book also presents a fallen tree near where Yuri and Georgi were found. To explain why the tent was found on the slope, 1079 suggests something bold. The military relocated the tent and bodies uphill to cover for the incident that their weapons testing caused. While the book did an impressive job of connecting the dots, it does tend to ask for a lot. A tree would have to fall at just the right angle in just the right spot without leaving obvious damage or debris. Then we'd have to assume authorities moved their entire setup uphill in deep snow without a trace, such as debris from the tree or their own footprints, and that all their injuries came from this single event. According to the original documents, no one at the scene ever mentioned a fallen tree worth noting. That doesn't prove it wasn't there, but then how did they explain the footprints leading from the tent to the tree line? Did the authorities fake them too? The nail in the coffin for this one is the hiker's last photo. That final image in the film roll shows them cutting into the snow, building a wind barrier usually used for tents on that very mountain. Why bother making it if they were going to travel down to the trees instead? This one requires too many mental gymnastics to make it work. Alternatively, even if it's not from a falling tree, it's been suggested that maybe they saw secret weapons testing and special forces killed the hikers, then covered it up. Or, as originally assumed, they were accidentally killed by the weapons, and it was still a cover-up. The suspicion is warranted, given that military personnel were involved in the search and investigation. Not to mention that after the case was closed, the Soviet authorities quickly sealed off the area, restricted access, and classified the investigation files. Because nothing screams innocent hiking accident quite like a giant red top secret stamp across all the paperwork. It could also help explain the radioactivity. Perhaps the radioactive dust on the clothing is fallout from a nuclear blast, or from some other secret nuclear weapon. But this is where things start to fall apart. The radioactive dust found on the clothing of some of the hikers doesn't have the fingerprint of fallout. This dust found on the hikers was only beta radiation, and it was found in high concentration after 3 months. Fallout, on the other hand, emits alpha, beta, and gamma radiation, and unlike in movies or video games, fallout is actually very short-lived. It loses 90% of its strength after only 7 hours, and 99.9% of its strength after 2 weeks. And something also to note, Yuri and Georgi, they were stripped to their underclothes. They likely didn't leave the tent that way. A few of their clothing items were discovered on other hikers. The radioactive sweater and pants that Ludmila was using to keep warm were actually taken off of Georgi. Why is that important? Well, Georgi worked for a secret nuclear facility and participated in the cleanup crew after something called the Kishtim disaster, where the plant experienced a radioactive leak. Also, Alexander was a 4th-year student majoring in.
Well, then he could have cross-contaminated the rest of the group, but I'm pretty sure he would have been smart enough to know not to do that.
Nuclear physics at UPI University, which might explain potential exposure to radioactive materials as well. The others could have gotten that radiation from wearing Georgi's clothing, but perhaps it could be explained by something else as well. Some have suggested that small amounts of radiation could have come from common consumer items of the era, like radium-coated wristwatches or thorium mantles. However, these items produce more than just beta radiation, which rules them out. But there is a more natural explanation. Radon daughters. The Ural Mountains sit on uranium-rich bedrock, and so they could naturally give off radon gas all the time. As that invisible gas drifts up through cracks, it breaks down into tiny radioactive particles, radon daughters, that hitch a ride on dust and snowflakes. They do also emit more than just beta radiation, but they decay into long-lasting isotopes, like lead-210, which emits primarily beta radiation. They could have gotten that contamination during the hike, or even in the weeks their bodies lay in the snow. Also, this dust could have been in the snow or meltwater that they were found in, but chances are it wouldn't have been a high degree of contamination. There could have also been a leak of some other radioactive substance from the ground or mountains, or even a leak from a nuclear plant. It's all just speculation, but the chances that this is work-related or possibly also from a natural source is far more likely than weapons testing. And then there's the matter of the blast, or rather, the lack of one. If an explosive force had ripped through that ravine, enough to crush rib cages and shatter skulls, it would have torn into the landscape, flattening trees, snapping branches, scarring the terrain in every direction.
Yeah.
But when investigators reached the scene, the forest stood silent. Just an untouched stand of trees, still and upright, as if nothing had happened at all. The injuries themselves also didn't quite match what you'd expect from a blast event. Explosions caused massive burns, more than what was found, ripped flesh and even embedded shrapnel. But you might be asking yourself, what about those glowing lights everyone saw? Well, they were real, and they were most likely Soviet missile tests. But based on Soviet missile test documents at the time, they weren't anywhere near the hikers. The Dyatlov group met their end somewhere deep in the northern Ural Mountains, cold, remote, middle-of-nowhere terrain. But the Soviet R-7 missile tests that were being conducted around this timeline were happening at the Baikonur and Plesetsk ranges. The missiles fired left eastward, toward the Kamchatka Peninsula. Could a missile from that far away really be responsible? Not likely. The R-7's test path wasn't anywhere near the Urals. Basically, the missiles were close enough to be seen streaking across the sky like a moving star with a tail, as one report described it. If it were moving towards or away from the observer, it might look like it was hovering above the mountains, but still way too far to be causing any significant explosion or damage anywhere near Dyatlov Pass, which explains why witnesses didn't hear anything when the lights would expand, or rather explode. And finally, what about the government's lockdown of the area? While shady on the surface, this wasn't particularly unusual for the Soviet Union, especially during the Cold War era. Whenever there was an accident, especially one involving death in a remote or sensitive region, it was common practice to close off the zone for sanitary reasons. In other words, they didn't want more people poking around. With the Soviet Union, that silence wasn't always about public safety. More often than not, it was about keeping up appearances on the international stage. And in 1959, with the Cold War breathing down everyone's neck, the last thing the USSR wanted was the world seeing a disaster it couldn't explain. With all of these dead ends, there was nothing left to do but to close the investigation on May 28, 1959. The files were boxed up, stamped, and quietly buried in the archives, out of reach, out of sight. The official cause given by authorities? A compelling natural force. Pretty vague and didn't really provide definitive answers to the families left behind. Whatever happened in those mountains stayed there, forever lost. That is where the story of the ill-fated Dyatlov group ended for some time. Months turned to years, years to decades, until it became just another whisper in the wind on a frigid night. Then, December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union fell, and the secretive veil of the Iron Curtain along with it. With the collapse of the regime came a wave of declassification. Old secrets started leaking to the public, and the Dyatlov files
This is where
were
we find
among
out about
them.
that book.
Now, every interested investigator, journalist, and families finally got their hands on the original photographic negatives, and the hiker's diaries followed soon after. What had once been kept under lock and key was now, at last, in the open. The Dyatlov Pass incident was ripe for new eyes to pick apart the details, and sleuths around the world were definitely chomping at the bit. In 2000, families and friends of the ill-fated group launched the Dyatlov Group Memorial Foundation, operated by Yuri Kuntsevich, a friend of Igor Dyatlov. The mission that they set forth was transparency and research surrounding the incident. Several notable books have also emerged from this mysterious incident, each attempting to offer possible explanations for the tragedy. The first one that really dug deep into the case and brought attention to the public, especially in the Western world, was Dead Mountain, the untold true story of the Dyatlov Pass incident by Donnie Icar. What made Icar's book stand out was how it blended academic research with solid storytelling. It also introduced a new theory, one we'll cover a bit later in this video. The same year Icar's book came out, another notable addition to the Dyatlov Pass saga was released, the 2013 found footage horror film Devil's Pass, also known as the Dyatlov Pass Incident. Directed by Rennie Harlin, the purely fictional film borrows the style of the Blair Witch Project and sets it against the chilling backdrop of the Dyatlov mystery. While entirely factually incorrect, it introduced the case to a new generation, helping reignite interest. Documentaries, books, articles, podcasts, subreddits, websites, forums, YouTube videos like this one, media of all kinds launched this mystery into the public eye. And with it came its own various theories, new and old. One of them surrounds Semyon Zolotaryov. While the much older member had a very good reason for being there, some suggest he was planted there, which might help explain a few things. First, why was he one of the most well-dressed, with boots, even a compass? Why did he have a film camera on him that wasn't logged into his personal inventory? Why were those photos, when developed, conveniently murky, sometimes only showing bright spots? And why did Soviet Colonel Georgy Ortyukov take a notebook off of Semyon, claim it was empty, pocket it, only for it to never be seen again? The book The Dyatlov Pass Incident by Alexei Rakitin, which is actually a pseudonym for a group of people, published in 2012, explores the idea that Semyon, along with Alexander and Georgy, because of the nuclear backgrounds, were all KGB agents. Their mission was supposedly a secret from the other members, and they were supposed to deliver radioactive contaminated clothes to CIA agents, posing as other hikers, as proof of a secret Soviet nuclear facility, when there wasn't any, all to throw off the CIA. The CIA figured out the deception, killed the group, then covered it up, and then in return, the Soviet Union did their own cover-up. It's a hard pill to swallow, and like other theories, requires a lot of mental gymnastics to make it work. Not to mention, why would the KGB involve innocent civilians, which would increase the risk of discovery and danger? Plus, Semyon isn't the shadowy figure most.
Well, to be honest, it's the governments. When the government agencies are involved, like the CIA or the KGB, you can expect massive screw-ups like this. But the question is, were they actually involved? And I don't know. Well, let's see what Brew found out.
To make him out to be. He had a good reason for being there, as he was an instructor who wanted to get the certification to help increase his client base. As for why he was so well dressed, well, it's not unheard of for hikers to stay clothed when sleeping to help keep warm. But another possibility exists. Since there was a urine mark in the snow near the tent that was noted in the report, he may have, just at the moment the incident occurred, been out for a leak, or maybe a smoke, or even wanted to try and capture some night photography. Speaking of, hikers would often sleep with their valuables, so he may have just decided to keep his camera on him for safety, maybe even to keep the film warm. As for the destroyed film, well, he was found in running water after being there for an extended period of time. It would have been surprising if they got anything out of that camera. And then there's the missing notebook. That one is hard to explain, but this whole investigation looked to be messy from the start, and one piece of evidence that wasn't submitted could just be an error. It's an interesting and disturbing theory, but not really in the realm of possibilities. This is a great example of how facts are frequently distorted or even misinterpreted to fit someone's narrative. The internet is fertile ground for misinformation, which can spread rapidly, whether deliberately or by accident, and it's
Yeah, but the thing is, that missing notebook had something in it. Because everybody had wrote something in their journals or their notebooks. So there was something in it. Maybe it was just a name. Maybe the colonel didn't want to be involved with it. And the guy was just writing about how he blamed the colonel. And the colonel thought, well, this will look bad on me, so let's make it disappear. It could be as simple as that. I mean, it may have had nothing to do with the colonel at all. The guy may have just had a grudge. It's hard to say. But, and then again, look at the O.J. Simpson case. That one detective, there was no reason for it, but he took that knife and he hid it. The knife that would have convicted him for those two murders, but unfortunately they tried him on double jeopardy and he won, and they couldn't go back and try him again, but that's alright. I think O.J.'s gone now anyways. At least I've heard he passed. I don't know if he's still... I'll look that up here after a bit.
Surprisingly easy to be convinced by a catchy headline or viral post. That's why, rather than accepting everything at face value, pause and verify. Consult reputable sources, and remember that most facts need context to hold up. One of the most common pieces of misinformation perpetuated through other videos and podcasts is that Ludmila Dubanina's tongue was cut out or removed, and her stomach was full of blood that she swallowed while dying. This implies a deliberate act of violence, like soldiers or the KGB torturing her, but the autopsy never said her tongue was cut out. It recorded her tongue and parts of her face as missing, not removed. Ludmila was found face down in a creek. Months of water exposure, animal activity, and decay had taken their toll. Pathologist Boris Vozrozdenyi noted the tissue damage was likely post-mortem, and there were no signs of violence around the wound. Furthermore, the blood found in Ludmila's stomach may not have been blood. The autopsy described it as a dark brown mucosal mass, which could be blood, food, or other things caused by decomposition. And if it was blood, it was minimal, about 3.4 fluid ounces. Internal bleeding from chest trauma or even severe hypothermia can cause blood to seep into the stomach. It's not the smoking gun people make it out to be. This goes for the others that had missing skin or even eyes. Decomposition in nearby animals explain this away easily. Old theories also started to become new again. Some still believe the group was attacked, further pointing to bruises on hands or ribs as signs of a struggle. Take Rustem Slobodin. According to some people on the internet, even the often referenced website dyatlovpass.com, he had bruises on his knuckles. That might look like defensive wounds, as if he got into a fight, but if you read the autopsy report, it doesn't specifically state this at all. The soft tissue of the surface of the back and palms of the hands are brown-purple in color. It doesn't give any indication that it's the knuckles, likely just an interpretation of the facts to fit someone's theory. He also had a fractured skull and signs of repeated falls. Investigators concluded he likely stumbled multiple times while trying to get back to the tent.
Well, yeah, that can be easily explained. My a family member of mine has trouble walking real badly, and they will fall quite often. And there's always a concern that they're going to hurt their head during these falls because they have no control. They just go straight down, and they're covered in bruises from excessive amount of falling.
In sub-zero cold. There were no skin tears, no indications of hand-to-hand combat. The bruises likely were from terrain, not defensive wounds. The same for Zinaida. Some claim she had a baton-shaped bruise on the side of her torso. But again, if you read the autopsy report, it states, on the surface of the area of the lower back on the right side of the abdomen, there is a graze wound of bright red color in the form of a strip size 26 by 6 centimeters. A graze is not a bruise, and could be caused by a wide variety of things. And then there's the fact that several hikers were found partially undressed, with clothes scattered between the trees. To some theorists, it looks like madness, while to others, something violent, maybe even supernatural. Some say it could be explained by a well-documented symptom of hypothermia. As the body's temperature drops, nerve signals begin to misfire. Victims may feel an intense burning sensation and start removing their clothes. It's known as paradoxical undressing, and it's common in cases of extreme cold. However, in this case, it was neither madness nor paradoxical undressing. The near-naked state of Yuri and Georgi can be explained by another factor: survival. As mentioned, some of their clothing was later found worn by other members of the group, suggesting the garments were removed after Yuri and Georgi had already succumbed to the cold. So the rest.
There is one other thought I want to mention, and I don't know if Brew covers this or not because we haven't finished the video, but let's get it
might
off
survive
that blank
longer.
screen.
And then there's
But there is one thing. Radiation. Most types of radiation are small, minute. You don't even notice that you're even being exposed to it. But when you get into those dangerous types of radiation, like the ones that Brew has gone over, like the alpha, beta, and gamma radiation, especially those higher end ones with more exposure to it, and the higher it gets, it can actually cause a sensation of extreme heat and warmth. If you've ever had like an X-ray or some type of scan, and they'll give you like a contrast dye or something like that, those contrast actually have a little bit of radiation. It's usually harmless to you. All it does is it just really makes it easier for the X-rays to see your bones on the inside of your body. Is all it does. That's why they often tell you drink water afterwards to try and flush it out of your system. But if you get enough of that radiation exposure over time, even in small doses, it can build up. And since some of the clothes had clearly been exposed to radiation, and again, the way he explained it, they could have been exposed to the radioactive gas from underground, it will cause a warming sensation. And they may have simply froze to death because they were taking their clothes off because they were thinking that they were overheating from the radiation and not realizing that they were going to freeze themselves to death at the same time as they were basically cooking in their own clothes. I mean, I want to stick with Brew's interpretation right now, but that's just a possibility. What I just discussed, it's not a definite. But it is conceivable that they thought, we got to get this stuff off. And don't forget, they had backgrounds in radioactivity, in nuclear physics. Okay, so that means they would have known the signs and symptoms as well. So it's hard to say. And let's finish what Brew has to tell us, and maybe he'll have the answer for us. Because that is the way the title of the video goes. So
Radiation. Radiation is complex, so it's understandable that most don't fully grasp it, which is why the radiation contamination often leads to several, sometimes hard to believe theories. As we have discussed, there is a lot of nuance to it, and you can't simply state they were radioactive and use that to come to a conclusion, such as weapons testing. The missing tongue, the bruises, the radiation, the clothing, the cuts, each in one way or another.
well, the tongue and the eyes can be explained because it is practice of wild animals to go after the softest parts. And don't forget, those people had been frozen there for months and couldn't be recovered as quickly as the other bodies had been. So it's possible some critters, chewed into that poor woman, and yeah, that's just how it ended.
Have been twisted by years of repetition and speculation, a game of broken telephone. But when you go back to the original files, when you read what the investigators actually recorded, the story is still tragic, still horrifying, but more grounded, albeit still difficult to explain. The truth may lie in the mountain itself, and the brutal, dangerous conditions they faced. When you set up a tent in the open, especially on the side of a mountain, winds can be intense. Donnie Icar's book, Dead Mountain, The Untold True Story of the Dyatlov Pass Incident, one of the most comprehensive books on the incident, claims winds may have been the cause of the tragedy, but not in the way you might expect. He claims that winds have caused a unique phenomenon known as infrasound. The theory is that the winds hit the mountain in a very specific way, causing vortices that produced powerful low-frequency sound waves that the hikers could feel but couldn't hear. It caused them to feel anxiety, dread, even fear, sending them in a panic where they left the tent, went to the trees, and died one by one. It is easy to be skeptical of this, but there is one study that proves infrasound can trigger intense feelings. In a 2003
It sure can. I remember this study.
study,
I probably wasn't alive when they did it, but I remember reading about it.
concert goers were exposed to 17 hertz tones hidden in live music. They couldn't hear it, but over 1 in 5 reported sudden unease such as chills, sorrow, and anxiety, with no clue why, but they all felt something different, some even claiming a divine experience. So if the hikers experienced these sounds, only a few of them would have felt any effect at all, and what they felt could have been different with each member, which doesn't explain why they all evacuated. So while infrasound is a real thing, and it may have caused some of them to feel panic, maybe it's a stretch to think this is the cause of the tragedy. But intense mountain winds may still explain what happened to them. That's what Richard Holmgren, an archaeologist and founder of ArcDoc, a firm specializing in archaeological excavations and research publications, believes. Exactly 60 years after the incident, in late March 2019, he and his team retraced the Dyatlov group's route and came up with a more scientific explanation. They stayed at the former sites of the expedition and experienced winds and frigid temperatures that froze their food, zippers, and stiffened their clothing. The winds dropped the temperature to as low as -58 degrees Fahrenheit. It reminded him of another tragedy that happened almost exactly 19 years after the Dyatlov incident. In February of 1978, 9 skiers were trekking through the Inaris Mountains in Sweden, terrain similar to the Ural Mountains. As the winds picked up, they dug a trench into the snow and tried to create a roof, but their hands were so numb they couldn't set it up. They ended up leaving the shelter, but unlike Dyatlov Pass, one of the 9 survived, picked up by 2 members of the mountain rescue team. He was able to tell the story, a story that, according to Richard Holmgren, mirrors Dyatlov Pass. If we look at the last photo of the Dyatlov Pass hikers, where they're digging into the snow, the winds are blowing quite fiercely, but still manageable. He surmises that winds on the mountain, which are always unpredictable, might have plummeted temperatures to as low as -76 degrees Fahrenheit overnight. He believes that not only was it the cold that led to their ends, but a type of intense meteorological event called katabatic winds that could have forced the Dyatlov hikers to evacuate their tent in a panic. Katabatic winds occur when cold air, typically at higher altitudes, starts to fall and replace the warmer air below, It slides down mountain slopes, gathering speed as it descends. These hurricane-like winds can reach speeds of over 60 miles per hour. So Richard Holmgren and his team believed that the hikers were battered by these winds, and it collapsed their tent. They cut themselves out, as hikers at the time were taught to do, covered the tent in snow to keep it from flying away, and descended to the trees to escape the winds. And with the deadly cold, they all eventually perished. He claims the internal crushing injuries most likely came post-mortem, when the den that was built collapsed over time onto the frozen bodies. While this is a practical and sound theory with a comparable event, not everyone is convinced, at least not the Russian government. It wasn't just the everyday sleuth or even archaeological expert that wanted this mystery solved. The Dyatlov Foundation, independent researchers, and even some relatives of the victims were calling for clarity. There was mounting criticism over how the 1959 investigation had been handled, especially regarding missing documentation, unclear cause of death classifications, and how quickly the case had been closed. In early 2019, Russia's Prosecutor General's office ordered a fact-finding audit. Deputy Regional Prosecutor Andrei Kiryakov took the lead, organizing a winter expedition to Dyatlov Pass. Kiryakov imposed strict parameters from day one. Human foul play was off the table. The team would test only natural explanations, whatever they might turn out to be. Because once you've looked at all the other theories, as we've just done, there's not much left. The evidence points to something natural. Like Richard Holmgren's expedition, investigators made their way back to Dyatlov Pass to trace the terrain itself. They studied the slope angles, wind patterns, and the way snow settled on the terrain, trying to understand the events that unfolded decades ago. They also got access to all the old files. Experts conducted 9 different examinations, including a medical and psychological examination, a forensic medical examination, and analyzing the original photographs for the exact location of the tent. With that information, they put together an accurate 3-dimensional map. Once the
Yeah, it's pretty intense. Somebody really wanted answers and they were going to get them. That's the kind of work that they were putting into that.
investigation was done, they came to the conclusion that it was an avalanche. But not just any type, a slab avalanche. This is when a solid sheet of snow breaks off in one spot and slides down almost in place, instead of the huge fanning wall of powder you might think of. They believe this forced them out of the tent. According to their examination of the microclimate, they believe the temperature went as low as -49°F overnight, and they died of hypothermia. While not as cold as Richard Holmgren's predicted -76°F, but I think we can all agree it's not a temperature you want to be stuck outside with. Still,
No
many were
kidding.
skeptical, either because they've been strong believers of human involvement in the disaster, or because they didn't believe a slab avalanche could create those injuries. Many also questioned if a slab avalanche could even occur at those angles. This is where a 2021 study published in Communications, Earth and Environment helped to clear things up. In the paper by Dr. Johann Gaum, a snow mechanics researcher, and Professor Alexander Putzren, a geotechnical engineer, used snow modeling techniques to test this slab avalanche theory. Spoiler, katabatic winds are still at fault, but only a piece of the puzzle this time. Slab avalanches don't always leave dramatic evidence behind. They can be localized and subtle, sliding quietly, compacting everything beneath them without scattering debris. First, they needed to find out exactly where the tent was pitched. Using modern topographical data with photographs and old diaries, they marked the tent's location, which, as mentioned at the start of this video, conflicts with other estimated locations, including the one determined by the prosecutors. Whether or not it's accurate, there is a lot of topography like this all over the mountain. Then, they used accurate measurements of the height, and they determined the angle of the slope in the area was on average 23 degrees, give or take 2 degrees. That's well below the typical 30 to 45 degree range where avalanches are most common, so they needed to dig further, or rather down. They realized that an average wasn't good enough. They noticed where the hikers cut into the snow, it seemed to dip steeper before leveling out again. So with this new realization, they determined that underneath the snow, it was actually closer to 28 degrees. Still, it's not 30 degrees, but it's not a hard rule. Under certain conditions, slab avalanches have occurred on slopes as low as 25 degrees, and the paper explains that could go down to as low as 20 degrees at very low temperatures, because in the bottom layers, the snow's crystals don't stick together well. The key detail is this: The hikers had carved into the slope to make a flat platform for the tent. They leveled it out and even built up a small snow wall for extra wind protection. So while the surface near the tent looked gentle, the slope above them, specifically the buried weak layer underneath that snow, was at 28 degrees, well above the 20-degree angle needed for a snow slab, given the right conditions.
Oh, no.
That, combined with ongoing katabatic winds that dropped temperatures, making the lower layer weaker and packing more snow, making it heavier. The study suggests a delayed failure, that 7 to 13 hours later, a slab broke loose, hitting the tent with sudden downward force. It would have been small enough to hit the tent and not the ski poles, but would it be enough to injure them? Gom and Puzrin used the new numerical model, which,
Pretty sure
fun
it
fact,
would be.
was also used to simulate the snow in the movie Frozen, and plugged it into avalanche models. These simulations showed how this kind of slab release could slide just a short distance, yet with terrifying force. The key was that the hikers had placed down their skis to create a hard surface to place the tent onto. So even without traveling far, the force of the snow against the hard surface of the skis had enough power to crush the tent and inflict serious injuries, like broken ribs and skull fractures, without sweeping away all their belongings, as they show in this video of the simulation.
And it would have
Despite their
caused the
explanations,
injuries,
people were still skeptical.
and the cold would
Many
cause
pointed
the
out that the region
hypothermia
isn't known
burns.
for avalanches. So that's why, after the paper was published, Gom and Puzrin, along with their colleagues, made 3 expeditions to Dyatlov Pass. With the help of mountain guides, they observed and photographed clear signs that slab avalanches do occur in the region. They also noted, by 3D mapping the area with a drone, that some slopes in the area actually exceeded the 30 degrees needed for typical avalanches, further proving that avalanches are not a rarity at Dyatlov Pass. To the Dyatlov group, the slope looks safe. In all accounts, it should have been safe, but it wasn't. We'll never actually know exactly what happened that night, but using all the information we have, let's reconstruct the event to the best of our ability. A theory pieced together.
Daggone a Brew. Yeah, man, this was not only interesting, but sad. Alright, finish, Brew.
They're from reports, science, and evidence, and brewed up with a lot of coffee. It's the evening of February 1st, 1959.
coffee joke.
The Dyatlov group reached the slope of Kolatsiakl. They've been hiking for days, the winds biting through every layer of clothing. Tired, exhausted, but with spirits high, they decided not to lose the altitude they had gained. Also, it was an opportunity to practice camping on a mountain slope as part of their training. That exact spot was selected because it was the calmest area, situated in a wind shadow, where wind speeds were hopefully less than on the rest of the slope, and the snow on the top layer looked, to the eye, to be less than 30 degrees, what they believed was the cutoff for avalanches. And so, they dug into the snow, building a platform and snow wall. They laid down skis, set up their tent, and got settled in. They decided to not use the stove that night. While protected from the winds, they knew smoke would simply be blown back into the tent. They ate a cold meal, bundled up, and settled in. The plan? Rest, regroup, keep going at dawn. The sun fell, and so did the temperature. The air at the top of the mountain got frigid, and gravity pulled it down, speeding up along the way. Snow got carried by this wind, and when it reached the wind barrier above their tent, that snow was deposited, bit by bit, hour by hour. It got heavier, and the snow got colder. Inside the tent, the group was sleeping, some stirring from the intense winds and cold. Semyon Zolotaryov woke up because nature called. He got dressed, put his boots on, relieved himself just outside. He had his camera on him because hikers would often sleep with their valuables. He went back in, prepared a cup of cold cocoa, and cut some meat to snack on while the winds howled. Meanwhile, the weight on the snow above their tent kept adding up, and the pressure quietly built beneath the surface. As the stress increased, that weak layer below the snow eventually cracked and broke free. A massive slab of snow broke loose, crashing down onto the tent. The force was immense, and it hit the group with savage impact, crushing them between the snow and hard skis below them. It hit 4 hikers directly. Ludmila and Semyon's ribs were crushed, while Nikolai's skull was severely fractured. Rustem was hit too, but only suffered a moderate skull fracture. The group cried out, some in pain, but they were experienced and knew what to do according to their training. Those who had knives on them cut the tent open. Those who were buried were helped out by the others. Their tent was collapsed and under snow, so retrieving supplies would take too long. Right now, it was about survival. They had to get away from the path of a potential second avalanche as soon as possible. This was standard protocol. So Igor made a quick decision: go to the only shelter they had against these hurricane winds, the trees. They walked through the freezing cold, down the slope. Some were barefoot, others wore only socks. They were ill-equipped for the harsh, bitter night. In low visibility and tricky terrain, they walked down single file to make sure nobody lost their way. They were cold, tired, hurt. Ludmila, Semyon, and Nikolai were seriously injured. Rustem's head hurt from the minor fracture, but he was still functional. The rest were probably also hurting, just impact pains, but they felt it. Some got bruising and cuts when getting out of the tent, also from stumbling along the way, and they were cold, especially those with fewer layers. So while going deep into the forest may have made more sense, they decided to stop and make a fire as soon as possible. Being the experienced hikers they were, they had at least one knife and matches on them, so cutting branches and starting a fire was no problem. The fire provided some warmth, but the relief was short-lived. The winds were still falling from the summit at extreme speeds. The trees helped, only a bit. It made the fire making much harder. The wind fed the fire, consuming the branches far too quickly, so they had to keep cutting, keep feeding. Yuri, being the tallest of the group, reached up and cut more branches. Georgi helped, but no matter what they did, the group couldn't keep warm. The winds were becoming lethal. The group decided to split up to increase their chances of survival. Georgi and Yuri took on the responsibility of tending to the fire. Their efforts were vital in maintaining the group's only source of warmth, so they kept cutting and snapping branches off, feeding the hungry fire. Because of their injuries, Semyon, Ludmila, and Nikolai needed shelter, so they, along with Alexander, who was in much better condition, went closer to the ravine to build a den. They were still within view of the fire somewhat. Their angle and low visibility made this hard. Hoping the threat of a second avalanche was gone, Igor, Zinaida, and Rustem headed back to the tent to retrieve essential supplies such as the stove, food, additional clothing, and the first aid kit, perhaps even to see if the tent was usable in any fashion. Yuri and Georgi kept the fire going, desperately. They were feeling the cold. No matter how many branches they threw into the fire, it wasn't enough. The wind was relentless and merciless. They couldn't escape the feeling that time was slipping away, that death was creeping closer with each passing second. Georgi made the first decision to climb the tree. He thought he could see more, see the others headed for the tent, just beyond the edge of visibility. He'd been cutting branches, breaking them off, trying to keep their one lifeline alive. But the visibility was too low. The storm had swallowed everything. He saw nothing. Yuri climbed next. They took turns, breaking off branches, each one straining to spot a sign of movement, anything that might give them the slightest hope. But as they climbed, that bark cut at their cold hands. They only saw more darkness, more snow, more isolation. They looked back into the forest, black, dangerous. They didn't know how far the others were building the den, if they had even got one set up. It was as if the world had closed in around them and they were left behind. They were feeling helpless, lost. Time blurred. The cold and exhaustion dulled their thoughts. They were too cold to think clearly, and, in their confusion, the mistakes came. Yuri, his hands now stiff with frostbite and starving for heat, drew closer to the fire. He placed his hands, his foot, his face, all too close to the fire. Georgi pulled him back. Yuri got some burns, but he could hardly feel them. Now Georgi, colder than ever, just stared into the dancing flames. He too couldn't feel his hands, so in desperation, he took a bite of his finger to see if the feeling was gone. He felt nothing, despite tearing a piece of skin off. He put his hands close to the fire again. As he stepped forward, his foot went in, and he fell forward into the flames, sustaining third-degree burns on his hand, burns on his leg. Yuri rushed to pull his friend out with the little strength he had, but Georgi was gone, and soon Yuri followed. And then the fire died too. The winter wind continued to howl through the pass, scouring the slope with ice and snow. Zinaida, Rustem, and Igor tried to head for the tent, but they began to stray away from each other, not by choice. Staggering in the dark, disoriented, exhausted, they couldn't see the person in front or back. They couldn't hear them, but they pushed forward, believing this may be the only thing to save their group. They tripped and fell, cuts and bruises everywhere. The snow sucked up their body heat like a sponge. The painful cold went away, nerves stopped firing, hands and feet went first, then rationality. The deep snow was relentless, and their bodies started to shut down. They slowed, climbed. Igor, ahead of the group, looked back to see if the other two were following, but he collapsed onto his back and closed his eyes. Rustem and Zinaida didn't see where Igor had fallen, nor did they see each other. They walked past him, still driven. Soon, Rustem fell unconscious, the last of his warmth melting the snow beneath him. Zinaida made it further, before she too fell, hitting her side on something hard. She clawed at the snow, her frostbitten hands tearing against ice and rock. She dragged herself, scraping more of her skin. But then, her eyes closed, and she too was gone. There were 4, deeper in the woods, trying to survive. Ludmila was the worst off. Her ribs were broken, and her heart was bleeding. She was likely sitting somewhere, in and out of consciousness, as the others tried to hurriedly build the shelter, pulling fir branches from nearby trees. Semyon with his broken ribs and Nikolai with his fractured skull were struggling to help. Alexander, with no major injuries, likely built most of the shelter. At some point, as he walked through the forest, didn't see the fire in the distance. So he made his way back to check, only to find Yuri and Georgi on the floor. He laid their bodies out, side by side, respectfully, before making a decision to take some of their clothes. It was survival. He brought back the clothes to the others and gave Ludmila a sweater and pants they wrapped around her legs, the clothes contaminated with radiation, in hopes the warmth would help her wake up. They didn't know she was bleeding on the inside. Branches were arranged across the snow to form a raised floor, anything to stay off the ice-packed ground. Snow walls went up around it, compacted and reinforced to block the biting wind. But as they rested, huddled in that snow den, they hoped the 3 who went to the tent made it and would bring back supplies, something to keep them warm and alive. But nobody came. Ludmila never woke up. Then Semyon and Nikolai also closed their eyes, succumbing to their injuries. Alexander huddled with them until he closed his eyes too, falling victim to the cold. Time passed. The bodies of the 3 heading to the tent were in sparse forest, and so they were buried under layers of snow. The 2 under the cedar tree were hit by weaker winds. The snow covered them, but to a lesser extent. As snow built up at the ravine, the den collapsed at some point, hiding them in buried snow. Igor, Zinaida, Rustem, Yuri, and Georgi were found first. Those of the dead were so buried, it's no surprise they weren't found until the snow melted. As spring came, water and melting snow pushed the bodies of Ludmila, Semyon, Nikolai, and Alexander down the ravine. Their bodies decomposed faster because of the running water and scavengers, which is why Ludmila, who was found in the water face first, was found in such a horrific way. Then they were finally found, and the mystery began. The Dyatlov Pass incident has defied a single, simple answer for over 60 years. But the theory of a Slav avalanche, with its sudden force and destructive power, provides an unsettling clarity as to why the hikers slashed their tent and walked into the freezing night. It explains the traumatic injuries, broken bones, and internal wounds that seemed so out of place. Many of the details we used to fill in the gap that night may be completely wrong. For example, some suspect those in the den got their injuries when the den collapsed, either before or after they died, rather than the avalanche itself. It's possible, and truth is, we'll never know for sure. But hopefully this video helped clear up the many misconceptions and put to bed some of the most common improbable theories out there. In the end, the most grounded theories often offer the least satisfaction. But sometimes, the truth isn't just tragic, it's terrifyingly banal, grounded in nature's cold and merciless but ultimately impersonal power. These were people, caught in something that was beyond their control, fighting for survival against a compelling natural force that, in the end, proved too much to conquer. And there you have it, folks. You made it to the end of our longest video yet. Congrats and thanks for sticking around. Hopefully that means you enjoyed it, and that many others will too.
Got a little too
Projects
cheery
like this
there
take
for a
lot
very
of time
sad
and effort
video,
from up to as
Brew.
many as 8.
Little too cheery for that. That was sad, man. I mean, I get it. You're trying to make sure people get a little get up and go. Oh, man.
Different people and need enough views to make it viable to create more in the future. But unfortunately, odds are it won't get enough views and won't make enough ad revenue to cover what it costs to make it. This is because most of our videos don't. That's why we have to do sponsor segments all the time. If we didn't, we'd all have to find new jobs, and the channel would cease to exist. But as you may have noticed, this video doesn't have a sponsor. That's on purpose. Since this was the most effort that we've ever put into a project, we didn't want to taint it by advertising some corporation's product or service. Of course, this is how we'd like it to be all the time, but right now that's impossible. But if you'd like to help us get closer to the point where we no longer need sponsors to stay afloat, there are 2 ways you could do that, and they're both at brewsolves.com. The first thing you'll see at brewsolves.com is our shop. That's right, we finally got merch.
Oh,
4
yeah.
different shirts, like the radioactive attractive shrimp from Walmart or anti-AI art, and a sweatshirt. Every piece of merch you buy is like giving us a donation, except you also get a cool t-shirt in return. The other way to support us at brewsolves.com is by becoming a Stacked member. Stacked is a platform similar to Patreon, except it takes a smaller cut from creators' donations while providing the same service. Starting at $5, our members get 15% off merch, access to behind-the-scenes sneak peeks, ad-free and sponsor-free versions of our YouTube videos, as well as exclusive bonus videos. We've currently got one bonus video up there with more on the way. Then, starting at $10, members also get access to the Brew Crew Discord server, where members can be part of the creative process. It's a fun community where fans and the production team can chat and go down internet rabbit holes together. So if you want to become a member or get some merch, go to brewsolves.com. Link in the description below. Thanks to all the Stacked members who have already joined, and a big special thanks to our top tier members, Nexus and Sander. Thanks for watching, and see you next week.
I applaud you guys. That was a good video. That was excellent. That was excellent. Well done, Brew. Well done. And like I said, guys, if you want, and I recommend that you do it because I'm going to do it, go to their channel, subscribe, like. I'm already subscribed to them over here, as you can see. And then leave them a comment because they clearly need it. Misspelled. I'm always misspelling. Whoop. Yeah, I'm not using my small keyboard on my laptop. I'm trying to save it because it's getting pretty beat up. The computer itself is fine, so I got a secondary keyboard and I'm not used to the size of it. How do I always misspell that? There's 3, so I only ever put 2. That's how. Wrong button. No, wrong button. Come on, fingers, work. That's the period. No. Seriously, there. It's late and I'm doing this. Yeah, I know what I did wrong. I'm just gonna... Alright. Hey, you guys. You think I'd learn how to spell? we go. Like I said, they do an amazing amount of work. So, let me see. No, I don't want to do none of that. I would love to be able to do that, but I have no money, so. Well, poo. I was really kind of hoping to. How does. What is this? Oh no, that's my thing. Daggone it. Is there a way to copy video URL? Okay, that's what I need to learn how to do when I make this stuff. So when I go to post, maybe next time I can pull this video up and copy the URL and put it in the description for all the stuff I do. Because I really like these guys. I think they deserve tons of credit. They really do. They put a lot of effort into this stuff. So anyway, my neon lights. I was Brew, and Brew operates with a crew, so believe me, they put a lot of effort into this, and they deserve so much respect because that is hard work to do. Because unlike me, they you know they actually animate that little dude. I use a VTuber app to animate my character, and it shows when I do things like this. Right? So, anyway, big thumbs up to Brew and the crew. Great job, guys. Great job. Alright, my neon lights. I will see you another time, and remember, always shine brightly in the darkness.